what you guys would like to ask. That said, I would now like to welcome to PMP Live, Afi Medie and Shruti Swamy. Peace is a brilliant scholar and a fierce advocate for women's rights, and she's bringing with her her new novel, His Only Wife. The main character, Afi, is a young seamstress whose life is narrowing rapidly. One day she is offered a life-changing opportunity, a proposal of marriage from the wealthy family of Eli, a man she doesn't truly know. She acquiesces, but soon realizes that Eli is not quite the catch he seemed. It turns out that he is in love with another woman of whom his family disapproves. Afi is supposed to win him back on their behalf. This is the story of an indomitable and relatable heroine that illuminates what it means to be a woman in a rapidly changing world. Shruti Swamy's book, A House is a Body, introduces a bold and original voice in fiction from a writer at the start of her stellar career. Dreams collide with reality, modernity with antiquity, and myth with identity in 12 arresting stories. In Earthly Pleasures, a young painter living alone in San Francisco begins a secret romance with one of India's biggest celebrities, and desire and ego are laid bare. In the title story, an exhausted mother watches, hypnotized by fear, as a California wildfire approaches her home. Immersive and assured, provocative and probing, these are stories, and they reveal small but intense moments of beauty, pain, and power that contain the world. And without further ado, I bring you Shruti Swamy and Afi Medie.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction so much.
Yeah.
Hi, Peace.
Hi, Shruti. It's nice to be talking to you, and thank you everyone who's joined us this evening. So what we've agreed to do is do short readings, Shruti and I, and then we will begin the conversation. So I will start with a short reading, but I'll provide a bit of context first. As you just heard, Afi is the main character in my novel, His Only Wife. And yes, and she finds herself in an arranged marriage. She's married to Eli, who is the son of her family's very wealthy benefactor. And Eli doesn't show up for the wedding, and it isn't until several weeks after the wedding that Afi gets to meet him in person. So I'm just going to read from this short section that describes Afi's first meeting with her husband, and this is several weeks after they've been married. Eli came at 1:36 p.m. I knew the exact time because I was sitting and staring at the analog clock on my phone when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me and I dropped the phone. I hadn't heard the lift stop and open on my floor. My mother rushed out of her room and mouthed, "Go," while pointing to the door. I hesitated. For some silly reason, I wanted to fish my phone from under the chair before I answered the door. "Ah, open the door," she said with sound this time. I stood up and smoothed my dress over my hips. My armpits were moist. It was a good thing that the fabric was light and patterned so that my sweat stains would not be visible. My feet felt heavy, so that I needed extra effort to lift them. I imagined that I looked like a marching soldier. The frown on my mother's face told me she was displeased. The bell rang the second time. She flashed her eyes as if they had the power to physically push me toward the door. My hand was so damp with sweat that it slipped off the round doorknob when I tried to turn it. I wiped my hands on my dress and tried again. This time I was successful. Eli broke into a smile that reached his eyes when he saw me. He was leaning against the door frame like someone who had been waiting for a long time to be let in. "Please, good afternoon," I managed to say in a near whisper. Should I shake his hand? Should I hug him? A kiss on the cheek? Last night I had imagined hugging him, but now no greeting seemed right for this almost stranger who was also my husband. It didn't help that he was gently leaning against the door frame and openly staring at me, his smile intact. "Afternoon, Afi," he said, his eyes never leaving my face. I lowered my eyes to look at my hands and then my feet, anything to avoid the intensity of his gaze. "Please come in for Ellie," I heard my mother say from somewhere behind me. Only then did he look past me into the flat. I breathed a soft sigh of relief and stepped aside to let him in. I will stop there.
Thank you, Peace. Thank you for reading that. I'll just say before I start that Peace's book, I had so much fun reading it. And I think one of the things that's the coolest for me about it is that it really packs so much like culture and a lot of issues in an extremely readable and like fun and pleasurable and joyful book. So I hope that you guys are all going to go and purchase this book from Politics and Prose because it's absolutely wonderful. So I'm going to read just a short excerpt from a story called Dee Dee, and I think you don't even really need any information. I'll just jump in. I woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. Dee Dee was at a sleepover. It was too late in the night for good news. I raced to the phone. "Hello? Dad? Dee Dee?" "Hi, Dad," she was whispering. "What's the matter? What's wrong? Are you okay?" My eyes were beginning to adjust. I took the phone with me back to the bedroom where the light from the street poured in from the windows and sat down on the bed. "Dee Dee," I said to my wife, who rubbed her eyes with her hands, looking for a moment like a child. I took her warm foot in my hand. "Will you come get me, Dad?" "Dee Dee, what happened? Is my bed still there?" "Of course your bed is still here. Did something happen?" But I couldn't get an answer out of her. I almost never heard her frightened before. It was her first sleepover. I covered the mouth of the phone with my hand and explained the situation to my wife, who said we would go get her in the morning. "I told you she was too little for a sleepover," she couldn't help but adding. It had stopped raining, and I began to put on my pants and shoes. "Honey, it's 2 a.m, she said, and then sighing, "Take a taxi at least." But I walked. It was warmer outside than I expected. Dee Dee was sitting at the top step outside her friend's apartment with her backpack on. She was wearing yellow pants and a pink sweatshirt she had outgrown, but still insisted on wearing. "What the heck are you doing, good do?" I said. It was strange to see her there. She tilted her face toward me so that the light washed down over it. "Nobody will have this picture of her, not her mother or the person who will take her away from me, for it will die with me." My daughter's brown face in the light from the street, the glitter in her black eyes. "I didn't want to wake anybody up," she said. "Come down from there," I said. She climbed down the steps very carefully, holding onto the railing. We began to walk. "Are you tired?" "No," she said. She held my hand out of habit. Her other arm swung free. She was growing quick. She might reach my waist, it felt, in a matter of weeks. "What happened?" I said. "Were you scared of something? Did you have a fight?" "I thought you were going to give my bed away." "That's absurd, Dee Dee. We would never give your bed away." "Well, that's what I thought." The two of us waited at the light, even though there was nobody coming. All the neighborhood cats had come out, the shy ones that would skitter away if they saw us during the daytime. But at night they were free and hissed if we got too close. "Do you ever feel sad when you go to the library?" she asked. "Do you?" "Yeah," she said. "I feel like there's just so many books there and I'll never be able to read them all." "Well, a lot of those books aren't even good books. They're like cookbooks and books on computer programming." "Oh, so you don't feel sad when you go to the library?" "Sometimes I do." I had been walking quickly and she lagged a little behind me, so I slowed. It was a great pleasure to watch her move. She gathered her hands into her fists and marched, full of destination. Why were you so worried we were going to give your bed away?" "Well, there are all these friends who sleep outside. Mom gets really sad to see all those friends outside. So I thought maybe since I wasn't using my bed, she would give it to one of them. I don't mind just for one night, but tomorrow I would need my bed again. And what if he didn't want to leave? Will we have to share it? Why did those friends have to sleep outside anyway?" It was a question she asked frequently and never seemed satisfied with an answer. So I just shrugged. "I don't know, Dee Dee. Some friends sleep outside, some friends sleep inside. But we would never give your bed away. I know you wouldn't, but what if Mom wanted to?" "Mom knows your bed is your bed, even when you're not using it, okay?" "Okay," she said. Sometimes I still couldn't read her. "Dee Dee, there's something I want to tell you. You had an older brother." "I did," she said. "Where is he?" "He died before he was born." What kind of person was he? I don't know, I said. I looked down at her. I could see the thought of a brother moving around in her brain. Still, I pushed her. His brain wasn't fully formed, so he died. Died, said Dee Dee. Then she said, like all those people in Japan. Kind of like that, I said. We crossed Valencia Street, a strange press of people because the bars were all closing, and they seemed shocked to see Dee Dee, standing so small and fearless among them. Drunk people have their own logic, I suppose. I lifted her up. It was that old myth, Krishna's father carrying baby Krishna on his shoulders, the waters rising to touch the child's feet. I held onto her shins, her feet knocking against my chest. She wrapped her arms around my neck and leaned forward so her chest was against my head. Then we crossed Valencia Street, and the streets were empty. And I'll just stop there. So Peace, I prepared several questions for you. So if you don't mind, I would be happy to get us started. Great. Well, so I have kind of like a fairly simple question to start, where I was just kind of wondering where this book started for you. I know that you are also a scholar, and I wondered if this story sort of intersected or came out of your research, or it feels totally separate from that. And I also have to say that the first line of the book is incredibly, I'm not like a huge believer in first lines, like some of them can be very plain, whatever, but this line it's so brilliant. It's very short and simple. The first line is, I already said his name wrong, sorry. Eli married me in absentia. He did not come to our wedding. It's so short and so powerful, and it contains the entire novel in one go. So I sort of wondered if that was where you started writing the book, or where any place where this book started for you.
No, thank you. Thank you for that excellent question. So where did it start? It's, you're very right. My research, as a scholar, my research did influence the book. Much of my work focuses on gender norms and how they affect women in different political situations and social situations. And so one of the projects that I worked on was on intimate partner violence in post-conflict states. And I did fieldwork in Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire. And one of the things that came out of my interviews with survivors of violence was this point about how women wanted to leave abusive relationships, but were under pressure from relatives and friends not to leave those relationships. So they were being pressured to stay in unhappy relationships, basically. And so for a long time, I'd been thinking about that idea about, women under pressure in different ways. And so not necessarily about violence, but the different ways in which social forces act upon women to influence the decisions that they make in relationships. So that was one part of it. The second part of it was that I was just keen to read stories about like Black women, African women, Ghanaian women, just being normal and falling in love and getting their heart broken and thinking about their careers and their families. I love those kinds of stories, and I tend to write what I like. And so those are the two like sides of my research, my personal interests come together leading to this book. And then, the first line came about by the time I'd finished the first chapter, I had some version of that first sentence on Elikem marrying Afi in absentia. And I always knew from the beginning that their relationship would be quite unconventional. And I wanted a first line that would communicate that to the reader, because after reading that first line, you definitely don't think you're going to have a regular, very boring.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yes, that is, So that is where that first line came from. But I think I'm going to throw that question back at you, because as I was reading, I thought, your writing is so beautiful. The imagery is so intense. There were several places where, and by the way, I'm still reading the story. So I was like, I'm going to stop. And I'm reading, it's a PDF document. So sorry, I don't have a copy of your book. I'm going to highlight this PDF document. So beautiful. And I mean, there's so many things that I love about it, including that you speak a lot about grief and about loss and about desire, and I think that those things make for such a rich story. But as I was reading, I kept thinking, were there political or social events that were happening as we were writing the stories, that led you to focus on what you focused on? So yes, I'd love to hear about where it all started.
Yeah, I think I wrote this book over the course of like 10 years. So there was a lot, both personally and politically, that was happening during that time. I think some of them are more obvious than others. The title story, A House is a Body, is about a California wildfire that is like, unfortunately every year, then I feel like somebody will be like, this is so prescient. And then it was like, it actually wasn't prescient at all. It's just, we've been, I when I was growing up in Northern California, there are wildfires all the time, like every year, every couple years. So they've definitely been increasing, but that's been a fact of life for California for a really long time. So there are some stories that do more explicitly speak to political or social moments. But I think more than anything, the ones that feel like bigger stories like that one are also The Siege. The Siege actually is a retelling of an Indian, foundational Indian myth, Hindu myth, the Ramayana. And it's a very small part of that story. It's an epic, incredibly long, complex story with a rich cast of characters. But I took a very small section and I retold it from the perspective of the queen. Of the demon queen, who's actually, the demons are the bad guys in the traditional telling of the Ramayana, or many tellings of the Ramayana. And that one, I felt like for her, she's really watching this encroaching, like she can just feel this dread coming. She knows that her world is about to change, and it's but she doesn't know when or really how, but she's waiting for this big change to come. And that, I think, is really a response to just these many things that have been building in this country and globally, and this feeling of dread, environmental collapse, political collapse. So some of these stories, I think these stories are really personal. They're really focused on the connections between my characters, and that feels really important to me, to keep the focus very interior and very very focused on that. But even then, in some of those smaller stories, some of these characters are kind of going through like a personal apocalypse, where something very devastating has happened in their life, and they have to find out how they will move forward, how they will continue to live. And in that way, that feels political to me too, or that feels like a very urgent question to me right now in response to political or, everything that's going on in the world, and the feeling of doom and dread and collapse that's building up. I'm really asking the question, how do we continue to live? So that is a response to current events in that way. But one thing I was thinking, piece is like, especially what struck me, you're talking about intimate partner violence. That was the subject of your research. And something about this book that is so remarkable to me is that it has so much lightness and fun and joy. And so it's especially interesting to me that it came from such a dark kind of, the focus of that research is so dark and painful, because definitely many of the characters, not just the main character, are dealing with societal restrictions. But this felt like truly, and I don't want to give anything away, but a happy book, a joyful book. And I wondered if that was something, it sort of sounds like that you were saying that was the kind of thing that you like to write, but I wondered if that was like something like a response to anything, or something that was really important to you to center that kind of happiness and joy and lightness also.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question. And yes, so it was a conscious decision that I was going to write a happy book. I wanted to write a book that dealt with very complex and heavy issues, but write it in the way that was light. Mm-hmm. And yes, and that wasn't overwhelming, and that wouldn't make me, it was very important to me that people not be sad. Mm-hmm. And this is because for the last decade or so, I've been working mainly on violence. Mm-hmm. So I told you my work on intimate partner violence. I also work on civilian self-protection. Mm-hmm. So one of my research projects is trying to understand how people are able to protect themselves from violence during wars. And that includes going to refugee camps and talking to people and trying to find out how they survived civil wars. So it's very heavy, and after a few years, it was taking quite a heavy emotional toll on me.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to continue to engage with these larger themes about social norms and gender, but to strip away the kind of the depressing element of it, basically. And so the only rule I had from the very beginning, the only rule I had while writing this book was that there will be no physical violence. So it was very important to me that there will be no physical violence, because I would spend the entire week reading about physical violence, writing about physical violence. And I just wanted a place where I could, write about things I care about, but without that violence.
Yeah.
So that is why the book reads the way that it does.
Yeah, I love that. And it was also just like so fun to read. I thought that there was like one thing that I just really thought was really cool that you did was I felt like the stakes were really high, but I also didn't feel like anxious. I just wanted to know what would happen. Like I did feel like things would probably be okay, or, even though the stakes were super high, it wasn't like a life or death thing. And I think that there's this really wonderful balance you strike between between that kind of like lightness and like fun, and it's like also very sexy in some ways. That was really fun to read. But you're talking about really serious issues, and also you just you really packed a lot of culture in this book. I wasn't very familiar with Ghanaian culture before I read this book, and I was really struck by the balancing act that you did, where you gave me enough as a reader, as a non-Ghanaian reader, a lot of cultural context. So I never was like, wait, why is he doing this? Like, I always felt like I had enough information to parse all of the interactions, but I never felt like that was something that took me out of the story. Like I was getting like a cultural lesson or something. That the information was really skillfully woven in. And I was wondering if, I just wondered how you approached that, like if you had a particular audience in mind, and how you, just like how you approached like the cultural aspects of the story.
Yes, did I have an audience in mind? Yes, I had an audience in mind. The entire time I was writing, I was like, I want Ghanaian women to read this book, and I wonder what they're gonna say when they read it. Yes, I mean, I was thinking about Ghanaian women the entire time, and I thought, well, no, African women more broadly, but mainly I was thinking about what would Ghanaian women think about this book. And in I was very, I read a lot of academic books, and I didn't want to write a novel that was like, well, let me teach you about Ghana.
Right.
This is a cultural lesson. No, I wanted it to just be natural and to flow. So I didn't want to spend time explaining things and translating things to people, but at the same time writing it in such a way that, one without maybe even using Google could understand what was going on. Yes, and it's not supposed to be a cultural lesson. It's a story that's being told, and there's culture behind the story. So it was important for me that I didn't overwhelm the reader with culture. Yes.
Did you ever wind up like putting more stuff in where you were explaining and then pull it out later, or it was kind of as it was written, as it is in the final book?
I think there were a few places that I thought, no, at this point you're translating and you're being a spokesperson for Ghana. You're not supposed to be doing that. Yes. So I did, it was important to me that it didn't read like a textbook, that people didn't feel like I was, trying to teach. I think I do enough teaching already. In my other books and my academic journal articles. So I didn't want to, do it in a novel as well. But I have several questions for you. on.
I have a lot more, so you can just jump in
I
whenever.
can sense that if I don't ask my questions, you're going to keep asking questions. One of the things that stood out to me is how you write about loss and grief and desire. And in many ways, they're so intertwined. And I wonder whether you're trying to make a statement with that. This connection between grief and loss and desire. There were portions where stories that I read and thought of loss almost as a character on its own, and I wondered whether that is something that you intended and what you were trying to evoke with bringing these themes together.
I just love that loss as a character. That's really grief as a character. That's a really beautiful reading. What was I trying to do? That's a really good question. You know, I do remember there's some stories very explicitly that make that link, like the Mourners is one that really, these characters are really dealing with grief through this kind of refracted desire. That story is about a family who has lost it's a young mother a young mother has just died, and her widower and his relative and her sister are all, and the baby are all in this house together trying to grapple with that. And desire felt really central to me when I was writing it, and is very central in the story. And I had some very specific ideas of why I did that when I wrote it. What were they? I wrote it in like 2014. Oh no. Okay, what was I thinking? I think it was just this idea. I think that when we get to these places, like there's these places where we like remember that we have a soul and that we're gonna die. You know, like we can like go about paying our taxes and like brushing our teeth and like, you know, doing all our normal mundane things that we have to do to live. But there's sometimes, and I think in moments of deep grief and loss and birth and sex and desire, where we remember that we have a soul, and that like there's something that you know, it's not very pleasurable to be in grief, and it might not even actually be that pleasurable to be in desire, but the intensity of those feelings, when we get to those like almost those like thin places where we where something else is coming through, where sorry, this is like not very articulate. I think like we remember that we're mortal, and we have souls, and even the intensity, even their bad feelings or really good feelings, like ecstasy or intense grief, that the intensity is more important than the positivity or the negativity of the feelings. It's just that is the thing that makes you awake and alive to this experience, this really human experience that helps you transcend above the like mundane taxes, making oatmeal kind of daily existence. And so some of these stories, I mean, I don't think that I could personally live in that state, and none of these characters can either, but I wanted to orchestrate moments for them where they could remember that what it means to be human. And I think that grief, as awful as it is to walk through, is a deep teacher, just like desire can be, or just like, you know, physical intimacy can be. So I think that was one thing that really linked them together in my mind. Yeah.
I was really glad to read and see that desire was important and sex was important, and I like that you wrote about women that were unapologetic about pleasure, about physical pleasure. And I in my work as well, I try to do that, and partly in protest, because I feel like there's this expectation that women should not either feel desire well, I guess in some settings, either not feel desire or feel it and pretend like they don't. And so for me, I think it's very political, because earlier you spoke about like the mundane being political. And I think writing about women and sex and desire in that way is very much a political statement. So for me, it was just really exciting to read your stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think also in your book, it feels to me like joy is political, and like pleasure and joy are political acts that Afi Afi takes, enacts or embodies, and that's really cool. I saw that I saw this quote somewhere from you where you talked about the feminism of your book, and you said that it was an explicitly feminist book, but you also said, and this is a quote from you, but not in a way that might be familiar to many readers, and this is because Afi's path to finding her voice is circuitous and not always empowering. So I was wondering, maybe you feel like you've already touched on this, and that's fine, but I was wondering equally why you felt it was really important to write an explicitly feminist book, and also why you felt like it was important to subvert a perfectly feminist narrative.
Why did I want to write a feminist book? Like, what other book could I write?
Yeah, right. Like, fair. Totally.
I do feel like, and I think when we think about feminism, we often think about these very grand gestures and grand political actions, and that's true. But to me, it's also just the everyday. And so people who don't even identify as feminists are constantly doing things that are feminist, right? And so that is what interests me. But also to show how, because I think maybe to an extent, we sometimes think that the path to whether we call it empowerment or becoming independent or becoming feminist is linear. And sometimes we can be very harsh and critical of women who we think are not, following that path. And I think it's important to recognize that for many people it isn't. And for many people, there's like one step forward and two steps back. For many people, even when they get to the very end, they still might not recognize it as feminists, and that is fine. So yeah, so I think that is realistic, and I think that is realistic. And I think in some way it even is similar to my path. Like, I've met like 8-year-old girls who are like, they know what they want, and I'm like, oh my goodness, you're awesome. But I don't think I was 8 years old and was a feminist or like had these strong ideas. So I think for many people, it's this gradual process where you grow into it, and I guess life experiences take you to a certain point. And this is what I wanted to communicate in the book.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, okay. Do you want us to take questions now?
Yeah, we could do one question. I think we only have one question, but we can talk about it. Do you want to?
Hold on. Well, I was saying something. Yes. I thought there was wrong box. Okay. I thought there were way more questions.
Oh, no, those are chats. We can wait. We can also wait. I have a couple more questions. We can wait.
I also have a few more questions, so we can keep going.
So one question I had for you, maybe you also feel like you've already talked about this, but I was kind of wondering, this book is really about the intersection between race and class. I mean, not race and class and gender. And actually I want to ask a different question. And that question is, some of the most compelling characters for me were actually the bad ones, and particularly the bad women. And I just enjoyed and was wondering if you could talk about the character of Evelyn at all. And I don't think that it will be, is it okay if can I just say who she is? I don't think it's a spoiler, happens very early in the book. So Evelyn is Afi's husband's brother's girlfriend, his unsanctioned girlfriend, who's Afi's counter, sort of shadow. They wind up being next door neighbors, and Afi is they'll encounter each other, and Evelyn's very glamorous and kind of sexy, and Afi is very suspicious of her, and she's she's the unsanctioned girlfriend, but they're neighbors, so they wind up having a relationship. So I was wondering if you would be you'd be able to talk about where she came from, and if there was anything the idea for her character came from, and if there was anything that surprised you about writing her.
So great question. Evelyn, so I don't know, I feel bad when I say this, that Evelyn is my favorite character, because
No, she's my favorite character. I love her.
She should be my favorite character. So I have to apologize first and say, I love Afi, but Evelyn is my favorite character. And the character of Evelyn is me once again protesting society in some way. So I like to say that Evelyn is a disrespectful woman. Mm-hmm. And this goes to, or comes from how we talk about respect. So respect in Ghana, and respect is a big deal in Ghana. Respect for your elders. I mean, it's very important. We need respect in society. But then there are some people who have come to construct respect as something that only women should do. And it's always younger women.
Yeah, looking at you, Toga Pius. He could use a little respect.
Yeah, and so respect has come to mean submission. Women, so younger women should submit to men, and self-denial and not speak up. And so respect has, the traditional, I guess, meaning of respect has been kind of changed in this context. And I feel strongly that women need to be disrespectful. And so that is where Evelyn comes from. Where disrespectful means what? Disrespectful means, you say what you think. Disrespectful means that you speak up for yourself, you speak up for others. Disrespectful means that you reject practices and ideas that are harmful to you. And I think, once again, that is also a very political thing for women to be disrespectful. And it's not limited, it's not restricted to Ghana, right? I mean, you can look anywhere in the world where women, especially when women are on a public stage, women are, in a political position or positions of power. We all see, the comments about, well, not disrespectful, but the B word being used frequently. Comments about their appearance, and comments about, what they say and what they do, and it's constant. And I think that women, for that reason, should be disrespectful. And I also like to say disrespect, you can be disrespectful in big ways, but also in very small ways. And sometimes it's just saying, no, I'm not going to do that. And that is disrespectful, and it's important. So anyway, long answer to say that is where Evelyn comes from. And I'm glad that you love her, because I love her very much.
Oh yeah, she's a very compelling character. She is so enjoyable to read. I mean, because it's like, she's sort of exactly what you want. She's the one who questions everything. So it's like, hey, why is it like this? Or even just by her existence, she's questioning a lot of stuff. And it's kind of like, you as the reader, she's like almost your proxy to be like, wait, what's going on here? This isn't totally fair, So it's really, and also she's just a person in her own right who's very colorful and interesting.
Thank you. As I was reading, I was thinking, what does your writing process look like? And writing process as in the conceptualization of your stories, but also the physical act of writing, what does it look like?
Well, it's changed a lot since I've been working on a novel for the last several years. So that has been really different than writing a story. But many of these stories, they started, I'd have the idea or one little part of the idea in my brain. And then I actually even had like a little notebook where I would just write down a line or something of an idea for a story. And I would just have it in there. And then maybe even years later, I would understand another part of the story, and it would take off. That often I start with a situation or an image or even a feeling. Actually, it's mostly a situation where I think, and many of these, almost all of these, started with the question like, what would it be like? What would it be like if there was a wildfire and my husband had left me and I had a sick child and I just like could not cope, you know, or like, what would it be like if I had a child after my wife had a really traumatic pregnancy that ended in a loss? Like, what would that look like? You know, all these things are questions that I was just curious about what that would feel like. And some of them seem sort of sad or dark, but when I wrote them, I had an eye towards what was joyful about them, or what gave meaning to people. How would they survive them and find meaning in those situations? So many of those started just with me, you know, just that little idea, and I could only play it out so far. And then years later, sometimes I would come back to it and pick up the thread. And that's very helpful to me to remember right now, because I've, since my daughter was born 2 years ago, I've written like a few stories, but not very many. And I have a bunch of little starts of stories or ideas that I haven't really had the stamina to kind of spin out into a story. But I think that some of these stories, if I just look at the time that I spent like actually sitting down and writing the words that are in this book, you know, it would be like a week or something. They weren't very long, but it was because I had been thinking about it and maybe even writing drafts of different versions that looked so different from the final one that I didn't even count them as the same thing for years and years. So I think that my writing process is actually quite slow. And I think we put a lot of like, I don't know, whatever. We think that it's like so cool when people write really quickly. I think it is very cool when people write very quickly. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I also think there's something to be said for just writing, taking your time, writing a story and just letting it unfold. Yeah, what about you, Peace? What is your process like?
It's changed a lot. But I guess that's normal. So when I started writing His Only Wife, it was about late 2012, and had just completed my PhD and I was unemployed for a year. So I really began writing fiction again, reading fiction again. But then after that, I got a full-time job where I was teaching and doing research. And all of a sudden I was combining that with writing, and with writing fiction. And my conceptual process is very much, I think I spend a lot of time writing in my head. Mm-hmm. So before I ever put anything down on paper, sometimes I've spent like months or even years thinking about characters, thinking about plots. So the character of Afi is a character that I've been thinking about since like 2010 or 2011, but it was only early 2013 that I seriously began writing this character. And so there's this long process where I'm just thinking about the character and what the character is doing and who the character is interacting with. So when I did start, I had quite a bit of time to work on it. But then when I began teaching full time, there were times that I felt like nonfiction and fiction were jostling in my head for space. Because the fact that, and with nonfiction also, I'm spending a lot of time just thinking about my research questions and my theories and my methods and all of that. And so there are times when I will have to tell myself, stop thinking about fiction. You have to stop now.
Yeah.
I try something ridiculous, like from Monday to Thursday, you think about nonfiction.
Did it work? Could you do it?
Sometimes like I feel we just slip in, and I was like, no, it's Tuesday. It's not your day.
That's really funny.
Yeah. So anyway, but then the physical time for writing was also sometimes an issue, so there were times when I would wake up like 4 a.m, write fiction, and then from 6 I would start writing on fiction, and then go into the office and then teach, and depending on what time of the year I'd be, traveling for field work. So it was quite a balancing act. Yeah. So that was a process for this book. And I've promised myself that I'm not going to repeat that again. I need to find a better system. I haven't found it yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to combine these two things. but
Mhm.
definitely waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning and writing fiction all weekend so that I don't go outside is just not, yeah, I don't do that. But I love writing fiction and nonfiction. I don't want to make it seem like I don't enjoy doing these things.
I don't think only somebody who loved writing fiction and nonfiction would keep such a schedule. Well, so I think we have a couple questions. Should we?
Yes.
Should we get into them? Okay. So Allison says, "You're both such wonderful storytellers. How do you choose which passages to read for events like these?"
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, you go. Yeah, you go.
I look for a juicy passage, but one that wouldn't give spoilers. So a passage that is exciting, but at the same time doesn't reveal too much.
I just am like, I've been looking at these stories for like just so long. Like I just am truly finding a passage that I'm just like, oh, I haven't looked at this in a while. This isn't boring to me. I'm interested in this. So I just chose this one. I haven't read this one, that little one in a while, but it was just because I wasn't sick of it at the moment. Thank you, Allison, for that, for that nice question. An anonymous attendee asks, how do you know when a book is done? Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if I know the answer. I feel like for me, it's like my editor says, you're done. Yeah. Did you have a feeling when you were done with His Only Wife piece, or was it more like, I can't fix this anymore. I'm just going to because that's how I feel. I'm always like, I know there's problems, but like, I can't, it's out of my skill level. It's done.
Yes, I was going to say I have this problem, but I shouldn't call it a problem. It's just the way I am. I never stop revising for whether it's nonfiction or fiction. So it's often having my editor say, it's done, it's ready. Because if you gave me the opportunity, I will keep on revising and editing and just never stop. Yeah. So it helps to have other people tell you that it's good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like the only way. I still feel like when I'm reading some of these sentences, I'm like, oh, I would like to fix that sentence, but I can't do it anymore. Okay. Gretchen Bauer asks, for peace, I know that you have earlier published short stories and this is your first novel. Would you like to say anything about the difference between short stories and novels? And are you already working on the next novel? Great question, Gretchen.
Am I working on the next novel? Yes, because I'm answering that first because it's the easier question. Yes, I'm working on the next novel, but at this moment, I'm taking a break from writing. But yes, I'm at the same time, the next novel is in progress. What is the difference between short stories and the novel? Honestly, I was having that conversation with someone recently, and I said, for me, short stories are almost like mini novels, in that even though you might only get like 20 pages, that is just what you happen to put on the page. Because characters in short stories, especially with me, my main characters have such full lives, and that I flesh all of that out. But of course, I don't include all of it in the story. And for someone like me who spends all this time writing in my head, I think I'm spending quite a long time when I'm writing short stories, writing them in my head. And maybe a lot of what I think about in my head would eventually not make it onto the page, but it's with that same intensity and complexity and fullness for the characters. But what's your experience like, Shruti?
That's really interesting. It sounds like you just write the whole novel. You just only give us a smaller part when you write a short story. That sounds really rich. That sounds like a very incredible way to write a short story. For me, I think that there's something about the tension of how short, like the frame of the story and the pressure of what is not on the page that feels much more the driving force than with a novel. I think that a novel, it was so fun for me to start trying that form, because I also felt like I was a novice. Like I had written so many stories at the point where I started trying to write a novel, that I felt like there were some things that I understood how to do with it, and I wasn't taking as many risks anymore, because I had almost this kind of like muscle memory for how a story worked. And with a novel, I was like, I don't know how to write a story. I have no idea how to write a novel. Like, what do you do? And so I was just taking much more risks. And that kind of that room to just like move around in somebody's consciousness, for me, that's like really thrilling about a novel, that it's not available in a short story. So I'm really wondering what, if there's another novel in me right now. I feel like I'm still working on my novel right now, but I'm also I'm definitely on more of the revision stages of it. And I'm kind of wondering what's going to be next. You know, there's just that nice feeling for me where you're like tapping on something and you're like, oh, it's huge. You know, you just like start to be like, oh, there's so much more. I can't do it in just one story. And that's such a thrilling feeling for me. So I hope it happens again, but who knows if it will. Nicole Messina asks, what part of your books did you have the hardest time writing? Oh, I would really love to hear your answer to that piece.
The end. I think the last two chapters, because for me with his only wife, it was how much further in the future do I want to go with Afi's story? Because Afi is, she's such an interesting character, and even I was like, but what is she going to do next? Right? So it was tempting to just keep writing, because I as the writer wanted to know what the next stage would be for Afi. So yes, it was definitely the ending. At least the last two chapters, I think those were the toughest parts.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I found it really hard to figure out where to end my novel too. That was also maybe the hardest part for me. For this story, for this collection, who knows? It was all hard and not hard. I think that there was definitely sections of different stories that were presented their own challenges, but the hardest ones, it didn't make it into the hardest ones were the failed stories that didn't actually make it into the collection. But I can't think of anything that was particularly a particular challenge, because it was all challenging. Peace, do you mind if I ask you a couple fairly frivolous questions?
Please do.
So one of my frivolous questions was, did you base Afi's fashion designs? Like, I know that you didn't base her character, but her as a designer, did you base her on any particular Ghanaian designers that we can Google when we're, because I was just like, her clothes sound so cool and I wanted to see them.
Well, no, that's a nice question. No, I didn't base her on any particular designer, but I did like look on Instagram a lot to see what fashionable people were wearing. I was like, what are the cool people in Ghana wearing?
Do you have any people that you would recommend us following so that we can see the cool fashion? Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. You can just email me them later personally. I'll put them on my Twitter.
There's some amazing Ghanaian influencers, and there's some, and they're also really, really like brilliant designers in Ghana. I'm thinking, and I haven't purchased from any one of them before, but I aspire to.
They're pretty pricey. Yeah.
But they're awesome. Their pieces are just beautiful. There's Christy Brown. She just makes the most dream-like outfits, and I follow her on Instagram. And I'm like, one day I will wear this fancy outfit. And someone else is Duaba Sewa. She makes really, really, really beautiful things. And you can find both of them on Instagram. Cool. I follow them and I like everything. Yeah, so I was looking at like all of these very stylish people online, but these people I see walking down the street as well. People, when I would go to events, people I'd see, like I would take notes of things. I remember going out with my sister to a bar, a club, or was it a club or a bar? Something in between in Accra, and I had like my cell phone, and it was in the night, and I had my cell phone, and I was taking notes. What were people wearing? What were they drinking? Because well, in Ghana, I mostly live in a small town, and so when I'm in Accra, it's like, oh, this is how like the city people live. So I'm actively taking notes of all the things I'm seeing in the city. So yeah, I was definitely looking at some of the fashionable people in Ghana, and yeah.
Cool. Well, I think before we go, we were requested to say what we were reading. So I'll let you start, Peace, what you're currently reading.
Well, right now I'm reading, actually it's right here beside me, Bernardine Evarisso's Girl, Woman, Other.
Oh God, it's so good.
This book, yeah. It is so amazing, right? And it is, I just to see Black women's lives portrayed with such fullness and such grace. I am loving it. So yes, this is what I'm reading. I also have Wire to Moors, The Dragon, the Giants, the Women. Mm-hmm. And yes, and it's a story about her family during the Liberian Civil War, and when they came to the US as well. And I was born in Liberia, so there's also a personal element to it for me. And I mean, she's just an amazing writer. So right now, these are the two books that I'm reading. What are you reading?
I am reading, what am I reading? I just finished this book called The Body Myth by Rhea Mukherjee, which was pretty interesting. It's about desire and the body, I would say, is a pretty fair summation. That's kind of right. I actually feel like there's so many books that have body in the title, and I usually really enjoy them, no matter if they're fiction or nonfiction. I feel like if people are interested in bodies, I am interested too. And I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to K-Ming Chang's Bestiary, I think it's called, which is coming out next week. Okay, so I think that's our time.
Yes. I mean, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the amazing questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Peace, and thank you, Politics and Prose.
Yes, thank you for hosting us.